Well, here we are. I'm Tom Osman, and this is Whatever Comes Next. It's the podcast where I explore the world of underground and independent music making. And on today's episode, I am talking with Maura Pond of experimental dark rock three-piece Luna Honey, who have just recently put out their sixth album, Bound, which I'm a big fan of. And although I wasn't familiar with Luna Honey before I listened to the latest record, I was so intrigued that I went back and listened to all of their previous albums. And I have to say that I'm a big fan of everything that they've done. They are extremely creative band, quite varied from one release to the next. Sometimes the albums are more sort of electronic focused. Sometimes organic instrumentation is more to the fore. They do quite a lot of changing up the instrumentation from one release to the next, which I find very interesting. Even on the latest record, Bound, there's quite a lot of variety. The album starts out quite abrasive and it goes into a more kind of like ambient electronic direction later on. I find them kind of magical and mysterious and ritualistic and extremely intriguing. So it was great to be able to talk to Maura and get some of her insights about where the band is coming from and what they're doing. And I think that she enjoyed the interview too. So that's good. And I hope that you'll enjoy listening to it or watching it. The band is made up of the core of Maura and Benjamin Schurr and Levi Flack. They've had some other semi-permanent members before. And in fact, the previous album that the band released, called Aftermath, was actually a collaborative album made with Norman Westberg from Swans, which we talk about. And that was kind of an interesting reference point for me because listening to Bound, there were a couple of tracks that reminded me of Swans, but actually one of the most consistent reference points that I hear listening back through the releases of Luna Honey is Jarbo, famous for a lot of people in having been a part of Swans, but actually also having had a long, extensive solo career. And yeah, that was probably the most consistent reference point that I think I heard throughout listening to Luna Honey's catalog. But there's all kinds of other interesting reference points that I hear in the music. And we talk about some of those in this interview, but I'm not going to waffle on too much about all of that. I'm going to let you hear from Maura herself about the band. You can visit the band's website, lunahoney.com, if you want to get links to their different social media. And if you would like to check out the album, which is on Bandcamp, you can get a link to that through their website, or you can just go and visit Bandcamp directly and look for Luna Honey. The album is available on cassette and CD, as well as digital download. And at this time of year, when many people, myself included, are posting their end-of-year Spotify lists, it is a good time to remind people that Spotify doesn't really pay artists very much, almost nothing, particularly at the more independent end, underground end of the spectrum. So if you want to support bands, go and buy what they do, whether it's digital downloads, whether it's physical copies, whether it's other merch. Support your independent artists. So do that if you feel so inclined. And if you're interested in what I'm doing musically, you can go to tomosmansounds.com. If you want to follow me, you can find me on social media at Tom Osman Sounds. I'm going to play a track from Bound at the end of this interview with a little clip just before. And so with that, there is nothing else for me to say. But Maura Pond of Luna Honey, take it away.
She's got racing up to her ears. She is so sweet, buttercream frosting. She's there.
I said this to a recent guest that I had on this podcast. You have a much more exciting background than I do. What is this?
This is one of my favorite. It's a painting from one of my favorite artists, Walton Ford. I forget the name of the painting, but he does these really massive. They're like Audubon style, old school, massive prints, um, but around, but very like absurdist kind of
Mm.
versions of them, and I just love them. Definitely worth looking up. Walton Ford. I feel like if I were to pick like a painting for some of the songs on some of the albums, it would definitely kind of
Mm.
look like that. I think
That's
I.
a very cool reference point. I will definitely check that out. And by the way, Tom, pleased to meet you.
Yes, hi, Maura. Nice to meet you too.
So, yeah, I was keen to talk to you because I really like the album Bound, your sixth studio album. Is that right to say?
Yes, yes, that's correct. Yeah, we've got like a couple other, we have like a live album in there, but we don't count that towards that. So,
Yeah. And I have to admit that it was the first album of yours that I heard. But having heard it, I went back and listened to all of the others.
oh,
And
wow.
I'm a fan of all of your albums. And it's cool to see, like, I don't even want to say the evolution of the band because I feel like my impression of your albums is that you've just decided to create something different each time. It doesn't feel like this is sort of the genesis and we're moving this direction. It's like we do this and now we're going to do something different. And so it's very interesting to see where you choose to go with each release. And one of the things I'm curious about to find out how intentional this was, thinking about the album that you made before, Aftermath with Norman Westberg, and I know there's a whole story behind that. That was a very, I would say, atmospheric album, not a lot of percussion. And
Hmm.
Bound, the latest album, starts, I would say, with some of your most abrasive music with the first couple of tracks before things move in different directions. And I was kind of wondering, was this an intentional move to sort of like shock the audience to go like, right, this is like, really going to be like really tough. And then if they can handle it, you're like, it's okay. Like we're gonna soothe you a bit. Was there an element of that in how you
I mean,
presented it?
yes. When we had, maybe not when we were writing the songs,
Yeah.
but when we were picking the order for it, definitely. I think, because there is, I like to kind of, we definitely work and think in albums. I think some
Mm,
people kind of, they are sort of working on songs constantly and they kind of hit a point and they gather up what they've got and kind of see. But, I think we're, we do kind of approach things in a unit, not necessarily as like, okay, this time we're going to do this and this time we're going to do this. But, I think for Bound, some of what we were reacting to was the fact that we had been working remotely. We hadn't been near each other. I mean, Ben and I were together, but, you know, the Levi was in Philly. We were actually living in Richmond. So now we're all back in one place. We could actually like get loud in a room together, and that feels good to do after not being able to do it for so long. And then also our live sets have, I think there has been an evolution in the live sets where they've kind of gotten rowdier and louder. And so this thing would happen where people would go and they'd listen to kind of the more atmospheric music on the catalog, and then we'd show up to play a show, and I think people were surprised sometimes about like what, like, oh, like this is very different than what we thought we were booking. So, there was an element of like, well, let's just like put that up front, and
yeah.
then, get that out of the way. And then I think also for the quieter songs, the second half of the album is a little more minimal, and I think those are conversely, though, some of those are ones that in the past, I think we may have taken, we may have worked on more, we may have layered in more instruments, or just kind of like made them sound a little bigger. But I kind of liked the vulnerability of them, and I liked the contrast between the very kind of hot first part and the kind of, I don't want to say delicate, but like the space, the negative space of the second half of the album. And it felt like maybe some restraint would be
Mhm.
better there. Like knowing when to exercise restraint and not add stuff is its own kind of decision when you're kind of producing and arranging things. So and then for the drums on the first half, also we recorded, this is our first album that has drums on it. And
Oh,
part of
really? Have all of the ones before been programmed drums?
yes, yeah, no, we
Okay.
haven't. They've all been electronic. Some of that we record in the house, and we don't have drums in the house, but also we don't have a drummer in the band. But we were recording with Dan Angel, who has a space here in Philly, and he's an amazing drummer. So I was kind of like, well, what would it sound like if we put this on here? Like, this is the time to experiment with this. And I'm definitely happy. The electronic stuff is still in there underneath for most of them that have the drums in there, but I think, it was great getting to work with Dan and like add those like his very like loud caveman drumming in there.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I like on that topic of the way that the album progresses, I do think that it is like it comes across a very natural evolution. It doesn't feel like there's less energy. It just feels like you've chosen to go in a different direction. And I think it works very well. It's a very cool progression through the different kind of sounds that you can choose to present your music within.
Yeah, I feel like I get excited when I pick up an album and you kind of put it in and you listen to the first song and you make an assumption about where it's going to go. And then maybe you hear the second one. And I feel like the beginning of this is definitely designed, the first song it's abrasive, but it's like I think a more rock kind of somewhat familiar song. But then it goes into Vacuum Cleaner, which is not familiar. And I think does leave you a little bit being like, okay, what's happening here?
Definitely.
Um,
I would say it's kind of like it feels like a seance channeling Scott Walker.
yeah, I love Scott Walker, so that's pretty on the nose.
And then yeah, it's cool. Like the next track after that, which was what was the name again?
Barbie Cake.
Barbie Cake, that was it.
Mhm.
It starts off like, oh, this is a completely different direction. It's this kind of like cool sort of swing in a sort of alt rock style, but then you get like the abrasive elements that come back into it. So it's an interesting link to what's come before and then what's coming next.
Barbie cake is funny because well, first of all, like I don't know, I realize not everybody knows that like Barbie cakes are an actual thing. They're like birthday cakes that the bottom half of the dress is a cake and then the top has like a Barbie top.
Oh, I am one of those people. I had no idea
Yeah,
that was a real
this
thing.
is a very gender divide, I feel like, and who has seen a Barbie cake or not. So I wanted to throw that out there because I realized I was like, oh, I don't think most of the guys I've talked to have ever like been aware that a Barbie cake is a literal thing. I think that was we were trying to like it was like kind of a fun song, but our version of fun maybe, which is a
Yeah.
little unhinged.
Yeah, definitely. And there is like there's a certain ambiguity I think going through all of your music, which I was pondering about like what is the vibe, what is the atmosphere, what is the intention, and I'm never really sure, and I like that. It's like I don't get much of a sense of melancholy in your music. Like there's pain in there for sure, but it's like kind of mysterious and playful, and it's dark, but yeah, it's like full of possibilities. And to that point of being full of possibilities, and I don't want to like force you to give away things which you like to be mysterious, but one of the first things that struck me with the album was okay, it's called Bound, and you've got this item on the cover that I suppose I would describe as being some kind of medieval instrument for beating your carpet to get the dust out of it.
Yeah, it's a rug beater.
Okay, a rug beater, yeah. And but when you tie that with the title Bound, it sounds a bit kinky. And so I'm kind of wondering, like, if you don't mind revealing, like, what is the idea behind this image and the name Bound? Like, who or what is being bound?
Well, I do. I'm really drawn to ambiguity, and I think I really appreciate actually that you picked up on that because I do think there's a tendency. I don't think we make necessarily super, super dark music. Like to me, there's always either like humor or absurdity or some kind of light under there. But more often than not. I feel like it's received as like this very uber dark music. But yeah, I liked so the rug beater. It's both kind of a reference in Vacuum Cleaner. You know, Vacuum Cleaner has a lot of themes in the lyrics about. It's probably going to be a long answer.
It's all good. Please, as long as you want,
Okay.
no problem.
Yeah. It's probably gonna has a lot of themes about gender, but kind of the gender stuff as a metaphor, right? So like I was thinking about how I was getting a lot of ads about like ADHD medication and like things to like optimize your life. And I also had been looking at these old vintage vacuum cleaner ads about how, and they're all the things like of that you would think they would be, where it's like buy this vacuum cleaner, it's the, it's liberating women, like, and buy this for your spouse and she will love you, and all that kind of stuff. And I was thinking about how the vacuum cleaner and the way it was sold was this thing that was supposed to be making change, but really was just allowing a difference in dynamic to continue. It didn't actually really shift whose responsibility it was to be doing the cleaning. It didn't change the fundamental thing under there.
It was not a
And
tool of female emancipation.
no, no. But at the same time, it is ambiguous because it still had benefits, right? People still got time back and stuff like that. And
Yep.
I think that is a metaphor for also so many of those other things we're currently experiencing. Kind of not keeping that as like a simplistic feminist metaphor, but like a bigger kind of
Yeah.
absurd historical one for everybody to get something from. There's a lot of things we're kind of sold that are supposed to be solutions that are not actually solutions. They're just coping mechanisms, right?
Mm.
And to me, the opposite of the vacuum cleaner is this like rug beater, this thing that like you have to physically go out. It's kind of horrible. You have to like it's a lot of work to clean the rugs without the vacuum cleaner. It was actually a really dry documentary on vacuum cleaners that I recommend. I can't remember the name of it, but like it's a lot of work without it, right? But so the sort of rug beater as sort of the antithesis to that, but
Mm.
also it's a violent tool
Hmm.
in that it's used to beat things, but it is not a destructively violent tool. It's a
Mm.
productively violent tool. And it's also a like non-masculine gendered violent tool, right? That I just like that as a thing. And they did have a double purpose, like to your point, your original point, like they're both were used to beat rugs, but people would also like spank their children with them and stuff. It is essentially also a paddle. So
Yeah. I mean, it probably says
so
something about me, like the associations that I drew.
no, that's intentional, right? Like it's there to have all of those things
Yeah.
simultaneously, and I think all of those things happening simultaneously is very interesting. It's like why
Yep.
I like it. Bound, the title Bound also is that's from there's a the title track Bound, which
One of my favorite tracks, by the way. I think really
oh
great
great,
track.
thank you. Yeah,
Yeah. I really like that one.
uh and it's got the line like all of God's creatures I am bound for the grave. I'll uh carry myself there and nourish the ground. I have a hard time remembering my own lyrics if I'm not singing them. But it's kind of about this idea of being like bound is both a thing that you're headed towards, like to
Mm.
what it means. Like it's a going somewhere word, but it's also
Right.
a tied in place word. And
Yeah.
that also that kind of like double and opposite meaning to me is kind of like where we're always kind of inhabiting.
That's
And
a really, yeah, I hadn't thought of that play on words that like where you are bound to be. I was thinking purely of the like being contained aspect of it.
that as well, right? Like I think all of those to me, like a lot of songwriting is picking these things that I think are interesting, that they have sort of counter meanings or have, I don't know, there's just something in it that feels like I need to figure it out. So I don't
Mm.
have a straight answer on what exactly, other than like I think that's I think there's like a tiny kernel of truth in some of those, the juxtaposition of those like kind of simultaneously present meanings.
Yeah. Now, see, this is all making me think a bit more about your lyrics, which is something that I wanted to ask you about. So I've only been able to read the lyrics that you have on Bandcamp. So some of the albums have the lyrics and a couple of them don't. I think
Oh,
Bound,
shoot, I gotta go back and I gotta fix that.
I think
Thank
there's one
you.
or two that aren't there.
Yeah.
But I was looking through them and I was trying to figure out like what are sort of some of the running themes that seem to pop up in your lyrics. And I'm curious, like I have a feeling, I mean, I imagine there's probably lots of different influences that have affected you, but I notice what I think there's kind of like Christian mythology in there. And then also I get the feeling that there's like, I don't know, maybe some kind of like Freudian aspect, like you're thinking about the subconscious. There's lots of like references to water and references to the ground. You know, these can be very symbolic of different things. You're nodding your head, so I guess these are kind of like relevant reference points.
Yeah, I think, like I grew up Catholic, so there's I'm not practicing now, but that was really, church was my introduction to music, and I think that it naturally creeps in there sometimes.
Mm.
And I still find a lot of eh, I'm not very woo-woo, so I don't like like I there's a lot of words and talking about things that, you want to kind of talk about bigger kind of cosmic ideas or whatever, but you don't want to sound like you're toting crystals around or whatever. So like
That makes sense. That definitely makes sense. Yeah.
and I think like also like really old school religion has a lot of darkness in it and also a lot of light, right? So like I those things people have been drawing meaning from for a really long time, whether or not you sort of ascribe to them or not, I think do have some kind of human truths like hidden in them.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, like I chose the words Christian mythology quite consciously because I was thinking about, I mean, I suppose this is kind of more a Jungian thing than a Freudian thing about archetypes and the way that myths and stories get repeated. And that was kind of the impression I was getting from your lyrics. But yeah, definitely, woo woo did not come into my mind. So I
That's
think you've
good.
been successful in that respect. And on the topic of your lyric writing, so I'm curious, do you have like a regular writing practice that you
I
do?
don't. I keep meaning to have one, like in my 20s, I feel like I was really good about like journaling, and I think there's a lot of value in it. And I've gotten out of that, but like it's on the list of things sort of like going to the gym, right? That I'm like,
Hmm.
well, that's not good to have gotten out of that. But no, I think when it comes time, I don't write as frequently. Sort of we got this like stockpiling mentality where, we'll kind of stockpile sounds. We'll have little fragments of song ideas or, bass lines or just beats. And then those will be triggers to kind of think about moods. And then at the same time, we'll kind of have like a stockpile of lyrics or general song ideas or just like things that I think will be interesting to dive into, which could be anything from a Netflix special to an article that I've read or some sort of internet rabbit hole or going to see a performance or something like that, normal kind of artist, wherever you're pulling stuff from.
Mm. And do you go back to writing that you've done sometime in the past and go, oh, I can use that? Or when it comes to actually making an album, okay, right. So it's not like you, because I remember I read an interview with Nick Cave recently, and he said, yeah, like when I go to make an album, I don't have like songs that I'll go, oh, I'm going to have this and have that. I sit down and I go, right, this is a new album. Everything starts from here. And I thought, wow, that sounds like a lot of effort. So, so, but for you, no, is that right?
Yeah, no, same thing, really. I think some of that is we just don't, there's not a lot of songs that we've kind of written that don't make their way. If they don't make their way onto an
Mm,
album, then it's because they were deemed not good and they're never making their way anywhere. So, and there's not too many of those. Yeah, I think
But the same with like your writing as well. You won't kind of go, oh, I've got some writing that I did a while ago and I can turn this into a song. You kind of like to create it in the.
Oh, yeah, no, I do. I have a stockpile of things. I have a lot of failed lyrics that I've tried to write for songs that I'll kind of keep around that maybe they weren't working for something, but I'll put them in a folder and kind of save them. And then, we'll you never know. There'll be that day that you're kind of working on something, and then it's like, oh, I think actually those lyrics might work for this.
Mhm.
And then they'll get dragged back out. So yeah, lyrically, there's a lot of sort of recycling and even on Ballast, the song that's called Ballast, let's see, I forget which ones. Basically, there were lyrics that were written for one of those songs that actually ended up on a different one of the songs on the album. I
Ah.
can't remember which one it was. But yeah, they'll, I do like having a stockpile of lyrics. The lyrics are probably the thing that kind of is less tied directly to an album. Part of that is because I like to, whenever it's possible, if we can record sort of the first or one of the first takes of sort of the improvised vocals, like when you take the lyrics and you're like, oh, I'm going to respond to the music now. And
Mm.
I really like to try to make sure that gets recorded. Because we end up using it a lot. I think there's often like a magic in that first take. So
Mm.
like vacuum cleaner, for instance,
I
is
thought that would be one definitely to
yeah.
mention.
Yeah, sometimes it's just like it's easier. There's that like because instead of trying to reproduce something that you did before, which I think has a layer of logic to it,
Mm.
I think there's two ways to kind of get it really subconscious feeling performances. Like one is it's the first take and you're really not thinking about anything other than the moment of like what's happening and then you're reacting to it because you're not trying to recreate anything. It's just you're just pulling from the gut, right? It's there and it's happening for the first time. And the other is to practice it so many times that you're not thinking about it anymore and
Mm.
you can just do it um without really consciously worrying about trying to try. And I think that also has value. So, you end up in one of those two camps, and I feel like that's the sweet spot.
And mentioning vacuum cleaner, I think that's like one of the best examples of your vocal range. And I think actually I saw some clips on Instagram the other day of you playing live. And I think there was a clip of you doing that. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. Just seeing you writhing around, singing that, which really added to my feeling like, yeah, this is like a seance. Um,
Yeah.
have you had some formal training as a singer?
No, not really. I probably, that's on the bucket list too, is maybe to go and get some. But I sang in choir for years as a kid.
Ah, okay.
That's really where that's kind of coming from. Um,
And how far back does
Nowadays.
that go? Like when did you start singing at all? And when did you decide I want to do this for my own creative purposes?
Oh, let's see. When did choir start? That was probably, is it first grade, maybe? I think it was third grade. I think that third grade, yeah. It was like third grade to like eighth grade. I sang in the church choir for my church and took it very seriously. I had perfect attendance for 5 years. Like that's like I was like very into it. But that didn't really translate to doing any singing as an adult. I
Mhm.
think casually enjoyed it. I had really bad stage fright. Not just stage fright. I didn't like playing with other musicians. Like to me, it felt like something very private that I would do. I had a guitar and I'd write my own little songs and then not play them for anybody. And that was probably my entire 20s. And the band didn't get started until, my 30s. So definitely late to the game in terms of, I think how you're normally supposed to do this kind of stuff. But you kind of reach a point where whatever fears or anxieties that are keeping it felt less like that was something to be kept private
Mhm.
and more I mean I guess it was baby steps into it Levi, our bassist, Levi and I wanted to, we'd been kind of playing music just for fun together and decided that we should try to finish an album. And that was the intro. It was just like, sort of like how you decide to go climb a mountain or just, you make an abstract life goal and then you're like, let's just do it. It wasn't tied to this like, let's have a band and like put out 6 albums or whatever. But
Yeah.
that's you start doing it and then you don't stop. So
And how much of your time over those years that the band's been active are spent with the band?
Hmm. Well, that's a hard one to define, so like for backstory, Levi and I were married. We're not anymore. And then Ben and I are together.
Wow.
Um,
This is some underground Fleetwood Mac type arrangement we've
yeah.
got going on here.
So I don't entirely know how to answer that question because like
I think you've
sort of
in that
like
answer
all
you've
of the
already
time.
revealed quite a lot. Yeah.
um is the answer.
Wow.
We spend a
Fascinating.
lot of time together. So
Yeah.
and I think it's been difficult. There have been a lot of life things that have gotten in the way, both between like moving to different cities and then, when my mom got sick and my mom passed, that was like not a it wasn't making music until, Norman reached out. Yeah, that was just a kind of a dead period, I feel like. And then
So if you don't mind going into it, could you tell me a bit about that? Because I saw, I read a bit about the background of what happened. And yeah, I was very curious how you ended up working with Norman. So
you know Uh, I'm not really woo-woo, but this is an appropriate time to say I think that was like just a cosmic thing that happened. I had been, I mean, I guess to rewind, Levi and I had gone to see him at a show in DC when he came through to do his a solo performance, and I just loved
mm,
it. I wasn't familiar with his solo work, and I had picked up a couple CDs, so after my mom passed, there's a lot other stuff going on that like wasn't leaving a lot of time for grieving as well. It was COVID and
yeah.
I was just listening to his those CDs that I picked up like kind of on repeat and then, was listening to his music on Bandcamp and really started hearing things to it. And I was like, oh, gee, it would be really nice to work together sometime. But that is such an absurd thought because this is this person that I really look up to, and that's never going to happen. And then I bought a bunch of stuff. And I think probably in reaction to that, he reached out. He's like, oh yeah, I listened to some of your stuff. We should do something together. And I was like, what? So at least that's how it went down from my perspective. I was pretty crazy and not sleeping at the time. So that's I a little bit thought I was losing my mind and that this was not a real thing, because I had just been thinking about it and what were the chances that it would actually materialize. So yeah, I don't know. That one really feels like a gift from the timeline or whatever you want to say, that came together because I think it was ultimately fairly improbable, but was really nice. We worked remotely on that,
Mm,
wasn't in person. And when it wasn't really done with the like idea, like, oh, this is going to be an album either, we were just kind of trading stuff back and forth. So the first hat, well, I should say I'm always kind of scheming around albums, so I think I was like privately scheming, but like not necessarily concretely. But the first half is of that album are things that we kind of worked on and then sent to him to respond to. And then the side B is like a performance he had done that he sent to us to kind of react to.
oh, that's
And
cool.
then yeah, and I think it just kind of came together. It is lyrically supposed to all be one unit, like sort of like one long song poem.
Yeah, it's that's interesting that you did it in those two different ways. I definitely didn't pick up on it having been done in these two different ways. And it's interesting for me as well because I made an album which is more like spoken word with soundscapes. And I collaborated with someone, and then I sent them vocals, and then they created all of the sounds all around it.
Oh,
And then after that, I did another collaboration, but this time round, the other person sent me all the sounds, and then I created the vocals on top of it. So that was kind of interesting for me to do it both ways round. Did you find either way some kind of challenges to it, or did it all sort of fit together quite naturally?
well, I really loved the challenge of, we had done something similar with Branches before, which is a sort of similar sounding album.
Totally. Yeah,
Also
that's
longer
definitely the other one that I
form.
would pick. Like it because you've got it all, it's all essentially like split up as one track, like part one, two, three, four, five.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that they're in sort of a similar weird death story to that one. But I like the challenge of sort of receiving a longer form piece because I think it's 20 minutes or something, the second half or a little over. And sort of figuring out, well, okay, like how are you going to sing to that? How are you going to pace through it? How are you going to so kind of did a listen to divide, okay, these are sort of the emotional sections in here. Let's like record this kind of section by section so that it's improvised, but it's kind of controlled improvisation. And then also so that those segments can kind of be arranged and be distinct to kind of build and kind of like add to the landscape changing without overwhelming the intent of the original, the emotional direction of the original piece, which I just think that was really fun to do. It's
Mm.
not it was hard. So, I think that was fun because it was just very different from how we would normally do things.
And did you, like you said, the album was made remotely, but did you get to meet at some point? Have you actually performed together?
Yeah, now we played together. I would say we're friends at this point. He's a super nice, just super nice, and we played together with his other band last week. Actually, got to go up to New York and see each other. So
Awesome.
it's just very, very grateful that happened. It's always nice to meet the people that you look up to and then discover that they're even more wonderful than you thought they were going to be. Like they're great as people in addition to
Yeah,
being good
definitely.
musicians.
Yeah, I went to go see Swans last year at the start of their tour in Leipzig. I was living in Berlin at the time and I
Oh
traveled
wow.
there. And I had met Michael Gira, I think it was 2010 when the band reformed and then they did the My Father Will Guide Me Up a Rope to the Sky album. I went to go see them twice on that tour because I was very, very excited. And I met Michael Gira after the first show, and I'm sure he wouldn't have thought anything of it, but from my point of view, I embarrassed myself because I had absolutely nothing intelligent to say, and so I had years afterwards, like, God damn it, I met Michael Gira, and I didn't have anything clever to say, and then I got to interview him by email a
Oh
little while
wow.
later, quite recently, and so then when I went to the show, I actually got to meet him properly and like feel like I was having a reasonable conversation with him. So it's like, thank you. I'm happy with myself that I've managed to resolve this inner dissatisfaction. But the one thing that I slightly regret is that Norman was there and I didn't go and talk to him because even though, like, from what I've read and that I've seen, even though he doesn't really seem to talk much in public, he does seem like a very sweet guy. But I was still a bit intimidated. Like he's a very big guy as
Oh
well.
yeah.
So when you see him
Oh yeah.
standing there, it's like, I don't know what I'm going to say to him.
Yeah, no, I definitely relate to that. I think oh, and I was so nervous over email because I was like, okay, I have to not act like a crazy person, like, and then I immediately sent like a bunch of absolutely insane sounding emails. In hindsight, I was like outlining a bunch of like I sent I was way too over eager.
And talking about Norman and talking about Swans, there's another reference point, and I thought of this before I actually realized that you'd done Aftermath together. Um, and I'll be very curious if you tell me that this is not a real association. I feel like I hear a lot of Jarbo in your music. Like I hear Swans references, like actually the title track on the latest album, Bound. That to me has got quite a Swans feeling to it. Something that I kind of concluded about Swans years ago. Like I was trying to work out why I liked them so much, and I think if I had to pick any period of Swans, probably the period that I really, really gravitate towards the most is that early 90s period with
Mm.
Jarboe, like all the Bunny albums. I love that stuff so much, like my favorite music. And something I noticed with those albums is that they have this tendency to lock you into a sort of hypnotic mode and they don't resolve. Like you're just in that and then it stops. And that was a thing that I felt with Bound was that it's like getting you into this particular energy, but it doesn't allow you to get released.
Yeah, I think that, you know, I think that probably the same things, just from having listened to Jarboe talk about stuff, that the same kind of places that she's pulling from are things that like also really resonate with me.
Mm,
And they're, she does kind of have, she'll talk about kind of putting on like the different characters or kind of getting in. I think I do less of that, and I have kind of my character that I'm putting on that's like a little more but there's definitely a mode, or maybe I'm just using different words than she does. There's like a thing that you switch into that feels like you're like, okay, I'm like trying to actively turn myself off and like tune
mm,
into this other thing, right? And I guess all singers are doing that to some extent. But like that is almost a borderline, I don't want to say like religious experience. Like that is a like borderline spiritual thing, or like a,
mm,
I mean, I think that's part of like the magic of Swans, right? That's like why, like, there's something in that that just is different from other music. And like, you go to for me, I had to go to a show to get it. Like, I couldn't quite hear it until I saw them in person. Like, before that, I was like, oh, this is just like some angry music or whatever, or like, this is just loud. I had to see it. So once I saw it, I was like, oh, I get it. Like, and it also made a lot of those other albums. Like, I really like Children of God.
yeah, amazing album.
And sort of the exploration. I like the ambiguity in that, like it's not directly clear. There's definitely like themes of power and spirituality and things in that, but I don't think it's as like defined and obvious as maybe other artists might approach it. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think I also get frustrated because we have every now and then there's like similar lyrics that I've done accidentally, and I think I get frustrated by that because I'm like, oh shoot, people are gonna think that's a reference, and then I have to be like, you know what, this is actually probably a good sign that like of just like thinking about similar kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
Being drawn to the same kind of stuff.
And something else that I was curious about, and you've sort of half answered that when you were talking about sort of discovering sort of parallel interests with Jarbo. I get the impression with her. I don't know if I've really seen her talk about it too much, but I've I've read other artists talking about magic with a K,
Hmm.
like, and there's Jarbo's got so many albums, but she does have an album or two where magic with a K is referenced, and I feel with her like it's very ritualistic. I know that there's like meditation practice that she does. There are albums where it's like she's channeling some kind of spirit. And like I noticed on your first album, you've got that track Exorcism. And I thought, this is really interesting because I feel like a track like that doesn't just come out of nowhere. Like to have that kind of impulse to make a track like that made me curious. Like, is there also an element in your approach or in the band's approach in general that there is some kind of like esoteric aspect to this?
That's a really good question. I think for me, there's something, and it's a little hard to like put into words, but there's definitely something really intuitive. And I think also a lot of the artistic decisions and, what's going to be a song, what isn't going to be a song, how something is going to sound, um, feels like there's a thread, right? There's like a thread that you are following, and you're either following the thread or you're not following the thread. And the thread is not necessarily, doesn't necessarily care about what you personally like or not. And I think because I'm maybe not, I'm a little woo-woo phobic. I don't know really how to describe the thread, right?
Hmm.
Um, but I do know that it's there. It's there not just for music, but for like all things. There's like a thing that just feels like you're compelled towards it. And, or you don't have to, you can ignore it, right? But for me, I'm
Yeah.
interested in that thing. There's like a
Hmm.
thing that you can kind of feel and sense, and music is a way to get at it.
Yeah.
And I don't know what's on the end of the thing, right? Like, I don't think there is an end to the thing, but it feels like there's a compulsion to kind of follow a path, and curiosity kind of drives you. I think there's something like really human about being like, well, I can, this is the correct thing to do is follow this thing. And, I think when I listen to other people talk about magic with a K and stuff, it's funny. We did get asked about that like early on, and I had like not really heard about any of that stuff. So I was like magic shows? Like, what are you talking about? Like, so yeah, I've got a few more years under my belt now, but it was sort of funny to be caught off guard with that at the beginning. But like I understand. And some of that language like feels similar. Like it's people trying to describe this thing that to me also feels very, I don't know, like hard to kind of place a finger on it. And,
Mm.
on the spiritual side of things, I also think about other times in my life that like I remember being little and kind of having this like hallucinatory experience in church where time seemed to just evaporate. And those moments where it feels like the music is happening, but it's happening perpetually, in sort of, I'm bad with my catechism, but I know that there is a term for that. There's essentially like human time and then there's God time, and they're happening at different
Mm.
times, right? Like they work differently. Like God time is kind of like the thing that is perpetually happening all at once, right?
Mm.
And I feel like there's something about music that you can kind of get there. Like when it like if you're really deep in a good performance, like it feels like you're not in normal time. And I think other people call that a flow state, or I think there's a lot of words for that. But yeah, I guess that's my kind of long-winded and I'm not sure answer to that. But I think that there's definitely a component of that in the music for us that we're kind of chasing down.
I think that's a great answer. That I find that very relatable. Now, I don't want to keep you for too long, and I think you were told 45 minutes. So, do you have a time for
Oh
a
yeah,
couple more
I'm here for
questions?
I'm enjoying this. These are great questions. It's making me think a lot. So
Nice. Good. Well, I have a few more questions in that case. So, there's another reference point that I feel like I've heard through some of your records, some more than others. In fact, I'd say I got this later on Bound, like maybe on the track Gravity in
mm.
particular. And also I feel like I heard this back on which album was it? There was Parables.
Ah,
And specifically one particular album, I feel like I hear Coil in your
mm.
music. Are you familiar with Coil?
So I'm familiar with Coil, but I'm gonna have to be honest, I haven't actually. I know Ben has listened to a lot of Coil. I personally haven't actually.
Then
I
maybe it could be Ben's influence because
Yeah, yeah.
it was particularly in some of the sonic elements, like when you've got
Yeah.
the atmospheric electronic parts coming in. Sometimes I think like, oh, this is interesting, and it sort of connects to the Magic with a K topic because they were hugely into
Mm.
that. So it was another thing that made me go, magical, ritualistic. I wonder if there's a connection here.
Yeah, well, Gravity came out of a tape loop that Ben was working on. Was making a bunch of tape loops. Was listening to William Basinski and just like a lot of cool tape loop stuff. And it was a good example of one of those like, oh, you hear something and then you kind of I'll get a sense that like, oh yeah, I could write something to that, and then I'll kind of
Mm.
like go in the bucket because there's something about it that's on the thread. So
Mm-hmm.
that was another one of those that was kind of like, oh yeah, that thing there.
And on the point of the instrumentation, which you brought up earlier as well, I'm quite fascinated to know the instrumentation that you use because it's like if we go back, for example, to Parables, and again on Bandcamp, the instrumentation for some of the albums is listed and some not. I have noticed that you seem to play kazoo quite frequently,
Yeah.
which I'm fascinated by, because I feel like generally the kazoo doesn't really have a great reputation in music, but I'm very intrigued that you've put that into music. And there's so many interesting elements that get mentioned. So yeah, I'm curious, like, what kind of instruments were you using on Bound, and was there anything in particular that was new for you?
Ooh, new things. Well, we tried actually to keep Bound a bit simpler.
Hmm.
Um, the kazoo probably is one of the newer ones. We had done that on Aftermath, that like intro on Aftermath that's kind of sounds like horns. It's actually a pitch shifted kazoo going through a karaoke amp. And some stuff is like it's like, well, what's lying around the house? And there's just a lot of things lying around that you can work with at a given moment. And then some are a bit more intentional. Like the kazoo actually was, despite being a very silly instrument, was very intentional. We used to have a baritone sax player who
Mm,
played with us, and I was sort of missing that. There's kind of a slidiness to a sax that you can't get on a guitar. You can get that like,
mm,
whoa, kind of, and was thinking about other things that do that. So as a result, got a bass harmonica, which, can do low, slow kind of blasts, but doesn't have the like kind of slidiness to it. It's pretty, note by note. But that then became a fun thing to experiment with. And then the kazoo was kind of a like, well, that technically you can kind of make any sound that you can make with your voice on a kazoo. So what would happen if you pitch shifted it down? Like, what would that sound like? So, which apparently is still, and I think I just think it's funny to, like the song Bound itself was written initially on a kazoo and a ukulele, and that's really funny to me.
I think that is
Because
pretty
those
funny,
are
yeah. And you
really
wouldn't,
not very
as a
serious
as a listener,
instruments.
you wouldn't go like, yeah, this is kazoo music.
So I don't know. I mean, I think it's kind of funny to like there's just it's amusing to pick up something that's a silly
Yeah,
instrument and then write something very serious on it.
yeah.
Maybe keeps you a little, you know, I don't know. It's fun. There's an element of like play that I think is really important. Play, not like play like little kids play, where you're kind of like turning off the part of your brain, the judgy part that
Mm.
thinks that you're supposed to be perfect all the time, and instead just trying to delve into that creative, non-judgmental space. And it's really hard to take yourself seriously when you're, um, I don't know, when we're playing around with some of the instruments. So
When you're pitch shifting a kazoo.
yeah, yeah. So and I
This
think
is
all of us really enjoy like digging around and finding new sounds. So that's Ben's frequently like out gathering samples and things. Um, I'm usually attempting to do that, and then I just lose the sound somewhere in my phone. So like I'm glad that he's better about that than me.
and with all of this different experimentation, all this different instrumentation, what does that mean in terms of the live shows? Like from the clips I saw, the three of you are. It looked like you're all playing guitar, or one of you's playing bass, I guess.
Yeah, Levi plays bass. Ben plays guitar. I play a four-string guitar that's a baritone tenor guitar that Eastwood makes. That's sort of a niche instrument. So it's like a tenor guitar, but like an octave lower or something like that.
So is that then like in terms of the frequencies that's in between the bass and the guitar?
Yeah, it's kind of like a lower, it's tuned like a cello would be, so the tuning is different. But yeah, it's a little lower than the guitar, but it's not quite to the bass. And it's sort of, it sits in the middle there, can kind of trade spaces depending on how I'm playing it.
And how then do you manage everything else that would appear on the records for the live shows?
Well, we have like a drum machine and backing tracks that we use.
Do you have
So
like triggers? Like are you kind of triggering different parts, or do you have it all like ready in sequence?
we have it already in sequenced, which, we've played around with the triggers. Sometimes it's hard to trigger if you're currently playing something. So that's
Yeah.
kind of the struggle. And as a result, we do like a lot of the songs are very we practice a lot because there isn't any wiggle room to deviate from, you can't just be like, oh, well, I'm going to come in and measure late here or something like that. Cause no, it's not a drummer. They're not adjusting to you. So there is that piece to it. We also have some synths that'll kind of, earlier in the band, Ben was playing more synths and kind of switching off between sort of organy sounding synths and playing guitar. They've kind of fallen out, as we've been doing Bound. I currently bring my one, I have a Arturia Micro Freak that I play a lot on the records that
I think I saw that mentioned and I thought, what the hell is that?
Oh, I love it. It's such a cute little synth. It's got it's got like a touch capacitive keyboard, so you can play the keys, but then you kind of bend, you can like lay it's like super tactile. You can you can program it to change based on how much of like your fingertip is pressing on the key.
Okay.
Very fun to play around with. They're not too expensive either, so I feel like it's a good intro synth. It was my first so
that is very cool.
I'm not sponsored by Arturia or anything. I'm just a big fan.
Now, there's one other instrument I want to ask you about. So on Branches, you are listed, one of the instruments listed is tissue box covers.
Oh, let's see. Do I have one around here? Yes. Okay. Well, we went to a scrapyard in DC, and we were just like looking for things that would make fun sounds. And really, we were kind of striking out. And then there was this giant pile of metal tissue box covers that like I guess you put over your tissue box to like hide it.
Oh yeah, I guess I know what you mean. And then like it helps you just to pull one out at a time.
Yeah. For people who have some kind of aesthetic that hates tissue boxes, you can hide your tissue box that way. But they also sounded really great. They sound like gongs. And so we went through this big stack to find ones that made different notes, or had like the best sounding ones. There's still kind of plans at some point to assemble it into some kind of instrument, but for right now they're just
assemble the tissue box cover.
Yeah. They're just like in a box. But they're like stainless steel. And just have like a very nice gong like sound. So yeah, that's what those are. They're
fascinating.
Literal tissue box covers.
Now, talking about live performances and having things programmed, I guess like for any band that's been playing for a while, there are going to be live mishaps, but I feel like you must have had some traumatic experiences around, pre-recorded elements and things going wrong. Does anything stand out as like a horror story from playing live?
Well, we've really tried to minimize our horror stories. We've had almost horror stories, where almost because if the thing dies, then there's just no music, right? Then you just can't play. We came pretty close to that happening once, but we've got backups on like an iPod. So we were able to just like play to that. We went and played in Mexico, and we think maybe it was the difference, like a slight difference in electricity or something, but everything was just running a little slower than it was supposed to be, which, is a weird experience, because, it's not supposed to do that. So that's really, but no, I think actually we haven't really had any big dramatic, I knock on wood. We're going to have
I was
one
going to say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry if I just jinxed you.
But yeah, that's on my list of things I worry about, right? Like, because it's, if those things disappear, then they're gone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's like any extra level of technology that you're relying on adds some extra thing that could go wrong potentially.
Yeah. We did have the computer died while we were working on Bound, and did lose some stuff. But I think we're mostly able to recover it, but it was tense while we were figuring out like how much we had lost.
I can imagine. I recently lost a laptop where it had some interviews on it that I hadn't saved anywhere else, and they were gone forever. Luckily, I had three. Two of them I've managed to redo, and one of them I believe at some point I'll be able to redo. So ultimately, like,
Okay.
not too much was really lost, but yeah, it was a valuable lesson for me. It's like you might think that you back things up well, but you need to make sure you back things up instantly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or backed the whole thing up, right? Like not just like a piece of it. Because I think we had like part of the album backed up, but then like, other stuff floating around elsewhere. So
Yeah. Um, I am going to wrap this up soon, but I do
okay.
want to ask you a couple of practical questions because part of my thing with this podcast is that I'm trying to sort of build up a picture of the different elements that are most relevant and most important and most impactful for people that make music on an independent kind of DIY level. So one of the things I'm curious to find out, and I've got different answers from a bunch of different people, is the way that you go about booking shows or tours.
Well, we don't tour very much because that is hard. I think, it is a lot of work. And, we went on, when we kind of in the first year of the band, we went on a tour around the US. And I think, it's really valuable as a band to play those shows back to back to back because there's a discipline that you kind of get, and I think that it
Mm,
changes the way that you're going to play the songs. Um, but I'm not sure we really played with anybody necessarily on the circuit that made a lot of like sense, because when you're just starting out, you're kind of like working with where you have contacts and stuff. And
mm,
so, I think a lot of making that valuable is just like cultivating where remembering to get out there and like cultivate your like-minded bands and like-minded people in other cities so that you can, have that support network there because you do need it. Like artists don't have very much support for that kind of stuff. And as much as we can engage in like mutual aid to help each other, I think that's at least what we've been trying to do.
And so, did you do all of that? And have you done that generally? Like, if you want to go to a different city, you'll get in touch with local bands and you'll organize playing together? Or have you also, like, gone directly to venues? Have you had like a booking agent, for example?
Yeah, we don't have a booking agent. I prefer to have a sense that there are bands in an area that I would like to play with and then book the show just because I like to play good shows and we're kind of lucky in Philly, because we can pop up to New York or we can go down to, we can go up and down the East Coast pretty easy. And there's a lot of cities you can hit. So we do a lot of we do more weekend kind of things than like big tours.
Mm.
And we had been quiet for a while. We didn't play during the pandemic, and then we're kind of building back up afterwards because we moved cities, and so we're playing more locally here. But that's definitely the next challenge in the next year is to pull together another bigger tour. We did try going to Europe, and I learned things work very differently over there than they do over here.
In what
Um,
ways?
Well, I think the timeline of like when to reach out, like I should have reached out much earlier. I think we were reaching, and I forget how, I thought I was still reaching out pretty early, but I guess it was still like a little further out. And there is just like more support for folks over there. So I think I
Mm.
probably, and there's extra logistics that like I think you need support with, like driving around and equipment and all that kind of stuff. And then also when we got there, people wanted us to play longer than I'm really used to here. Like it was like, oh, you're gonna play for an hour. And I was like, we play for an hour, like unless you're like headlining in a big band, like if you're like a normal sized band playing in like a lineup of, three people and you play for an hour, like you're making some enemies that night. So so I
Yeah.
was,
You're
I was
encroaching on
like,
other people's space.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So that was surprising. Surprising. And also, if you have programmed all your electronic music and you don't have an hour, because you didn't put an hour into the machine, a little bit of a surprise.
Well, if I can at any point do anything to facilitate or like put you in touch with people within Europe to get you to come back and play in Europe, I would be delighted to help in any way at any time.
Okay, well, I may pick your brain on that because we played in we went to Brussels, had a great time there. We went through Berlin, but we weren't able to just timing wise, we weren't able to set up a show, but have a bunch of friends there. And then, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just nice over there. We played in Prague.
I
That was
lived there
a,
for 5 years.
oh, wow. Okay,
When
cool,
did you play
cool.
there?
2019. Yeah.
I was there, but
Ah,
the universe had
just
not
scares
decided
me.
to make us pass yet.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It was funny, kind of the audience difference between there and playing in Brussels, just because I feel like it was a bit more like one was a bit more dancier and one was a bit a more stoic faced maybe.
Interesting.
And I was like, oh, I can't tell if people are into this or not. And then I was like, I don't want to base everything off of one show, but it's always fun because it also varies like city to city and venue to venue.
Yeah.
But um uh sort of just neat to see the differences. Because to me, like the US is really big in comparison, right? So like you drive to like it was really fun driving around Europe because the countries you're passing countries like relatively quickly, like you would pass states almost. So it's really neat to see so much culture packed in there, like a very different culture and languages packed in, that tightly.
Yeah,
So fun
absolutely.
to, I'd love to spend more time and, kind of get to know the music there more.
There is a lot to be discovered.
Yeah.
One last practical thing that I do want to ask you about, and it's kind of funny because I feel like I have a lot of interaction now with different publicists, and I sort of feel like I'm never quite sure like whether to like shout out publicists because I feel like I want to acknowledge them, but I also feel like they sort of operate in this world where you're not really supposed to like talk about
Acknowledge
them.
they exist.
But
No,
if it's not,
same. This is the first time I've had one, and so I never really know. I'm like, but yes. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, 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 it's all good. So that was really basically my question, which you've now half answered. So this is the first time you had a publicist. I'm just kind of curious to know why you made that decision this time round.
Well, we usually do a lot of the work ourselves, and this so Bound we were kind of trying to put out on a tighter timeline. We already had spent a long time, at least for us, we'd spent a long time working on it. Decided to self-release it. Part of that was just like not wanting to have to wait to be in the calendar on like
Mm,
release calendar on another label. Like wanted to get it out by the end of the year. We're just like we're eager to start the next thing. Um, and as part of kind of that condensed, like having finished the album, but not having that much time, it was a lot of work kind of condensed in a short period of time. So normally I'd be doing, I was trying to do outreach and I came down with shingles and I was like, I am making myself sick. Like I think I need help actually. Like what pieces of this are the most painful? And I got to admit, I don't love doing the press like it's pretty grueling to just
mm.
get
And it's got to be like difficult as well, like as when you're the artist as well, to be like
yes,
promoting yourself and like, hey, check this out. I can recommend it. I
yeah,
made it.
I hate doing that. It's so terrible. So like not I love the general value of it, but
Yeah.
like the sort of self-promotion aspect of it is just particularly painful, I feel like.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I'm the best at it. So I was like, this would be a good place to reach out and then just kind of wanted to see who people we had thought about some other things, had explored some like other promotional kind of stuff. And I was just like looking into people's backgrounds and it's like, well, I'm not convinced that these people like the music that we make. Like, I think these people might hate the music that we make potentially. Like, I I know that you gotta like do businessy stuff, but like I'd still like it to kind of be where I don't feel like the other person. I feel like the other person might potentially like it and find some value in it. And I mean, I don't want to speak for Howard, but
Yeah.
that definitely drove a big part of the decision was just like who's a friendly person who's kind of in the world, right? And
I mean,
uh,
based on, other artists represented by Howard, I think you're in a good home.
yeah, 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 and he's the best. So especially after having traded horror stories with other people, I think
Um,
that would be a I don't know, like I have I'm pretty big on like our life is pretty short. Music is like making art's already pretty difficult. Like minimize the number of people that you're working with that like you don't
Yeah.
like or are driving you crazy or like I
Sapping your
mean there's
energy.
certain yeah. There's certain kinds of driving you crazy. Like everybody, your bandmates are gonna drive you crazy. Like there's certain natural kind of driving you crazy. But yeah, like you gotta kind of cultivate the world around you that you want to exist in, right?
Yeah,
So part of that I think is supporting other people and trying to work with other people who are like-minded.
definitely. It's a community.
Yeah.
So thinking about the release of the album, so I see that it's on cassette, it's on CD.
Hmm.
Um, there's obviously downloads on Bandcamp. I've seen that you're on the necessary evil of streaming services
Yeah.
as well. So what's the best way for people to get hold of the album?
It depends if you want a CD. Some record stores have the CD in stock online, kind of on their sites. So, like, I know the music store I grew up kind of shopping in has it on their online catalog. They probably don't have it in the store, but they have it online. I actually always prefer that as the first thing to do if it's an option because it kind of puts it on the radar. But also, I just believe in supporting your local record store when you can.
100%.
Um, and then Bandcamp, we're happy to ship stuff out. But that's also that's and the cassette for the cassette you'd need to go to our Bandcamp.
Yeah, I get a generally positive feeling about Bandcamp. It definitely seems to be more geared towards supporting artists than Spotify.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's like it's everything's got its pros and its cons, right? Like I I feel like I have my bigger bones to pick with the radio.
Hmm.
Like normal kind of commercial radio, I think is
Mm.
really failing us even more than maybe Spotify is because like you've got no chance of getting on the actual radio, right? Like that's just like you're just never going to penetrate that. That has no interest in like showing new music. That's just like let's feed the machine. Um
I guess the fact that I hadn't even thought to bring up the radio demonstrates that, yeah, you're
yeah,
quite right. It's completely off my radar now.
it's to me that's like it's this wonderful resource that is just
Yeah.
background music of garbage. Sorry for anybody that I'm not exactly like a big popular music fan, which is probably not surprising given the catalog. So that's
It's
maybe
all
not an
good. Every
inflammatory statement.
it's no, it's all good. Like the music, the genres of the music that people make that I interview varies greatly, but they're all pretty underground. I don't think anyone's going to get offended that listens to this or watches this.
Yeah, I'm very opinionated, but I don't ultimately like to yuck other people's yum
Yeah,
too hard in public.
that's okay. You didn't say anything specific. It's all right. You're not attacking anyone directly.
All right, next.
And what about following the band?
Mm.
Like I have a certain, maybe it's to do with my age, I have a certain resistance towards being like, hey, what social media platforms do you use? But
Yeah, it's Instagram. I'm gonna admit that the Instagram isn't like updated like a, a social media influencer would be updating their Instagram, but that's where we're probably putting the most regular stuff. We do have a website. You can go and sign up for our email list, and once a year, when I remember to send an email, then you'll get an email. But
oh
the
yeah,
Instagram
lunahoney.com.
yes, but probably the Instagram is the way to go.
And you're vaguely on Facebook as well.
We are vaguely on Facebook. And I liked Facebook, but we just find that there's fewer people using it. I miss that because there's, you can actually post events on there and
Yeah.
RSVP to that. There's a lot of functionality that's like not on the other ones that I'm, kind of as an old fart missing, but
Yeah, it's
it's
funny. I was interviewing a band quite recently, two members, and it was funny because one of them was like, yeah, I like Instagram, I like this functionality. The other one was like, I like Facebook, I like this
yeah.
functionality. So it's kind of funny that they had both sides between them.
Yeah, I mean, I'll admit it. I aggressively hate Instagram. I'm just on there so that like we can somewhat communicate with people. But yeah, but
Using
we're
it,
there.
using it
Yeah, I respond to
spitefully.
messages. post show clips when I remember to take them. I am a bit of a Luddite when it comes to uh I think there's just so many times like you've got private moments that now feel like you need to air them in order to like
Yeah.
create content, and that just bugs me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I feel like it's an ongoing balancing act of like trying to decide what is worth investing my time and my energy and my soul into, and what isn't.
yeah, and it doesn't feel like, because it's not you don't want to be you don't want to get in your own way. Like you don't want to be self-destructive and just like do things
Yeah.
because you're stubborn. But I think the difference is that like some of those things are actually quite like invasive to the creative process, right? So
Yep.
like you do kind of need your downtime and your boredom and your boundaries of the
Yes.
space. So yeah, it's still kind of trying to figure out the balancing act there, where the line is.
Yeah.
Well, and thank you again. I feel like um you're particularly insightful, and also like wrote uh I did see the review that you wrote, and I feel like you picked up on some things that not everybody picks up on. So, just thank you for spending the time and kind of being open to receiving the stuff.
It was absolutely my pleasure.